Today we're going to be talking about the 411 on the carbon market, and we're going to address the climate crisis. We're going to discuss how climate benefits are bought and sold through the carbon market, and then we're going to talk about the distinguishing factors between quality carbon credits and how to figure out if you're actually supporting something that has the due diligence to support it, and then how to engage stakeholders in your climate strategy. So, long story short, climate risk is both business risk and longevity risk. And so there are multiple ways that we can address these risks together through the carbon market. So the title of this session is very 90s. And so that kind of inspired me to do a deep dive of the state of the climate crisis in 1990. I might shut that. Yeah, thank you so much. So 1990, close your eyes. There's 5.3 million people, or billion, 5.3 billion people on the globe. And they just discovered a full T-Rex fossil in South Dakota. So lots going on. They've also discovered that there's a hole in the ozone layer above the North Pole. So the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, a lot of us know as the IPCC, has only been around for 2 years at this time. So that came out in 1988. And basically it was formed to assess the state of knowledge of climate change. And in 1990, the IPCC released its first assessment report, which provided evidence of human activities, specifically burning of fossil fuels, contributing to the increase of global greenhouse gas concentrations as well as global warming. And this quote, it's so, when I read just kind of what we know today, when I read it, it just has so much simplicity to it. It's like we've discovered that if we all come to a conclusion together, we can address this. If we do this now, we should be able to move forward as long as it's done urgently. But now we're in 2023. So let's see what the IPCC is saying now. They're saying it's really serious. We are up against one of the most complicated and interconnected issues, and the consequences are catastrophic. And even though the stakes are so high, industry is mixed in their response on how they should address this business-crushing issue. Aside from preventing extinction of life as we know it, climate risk is business risk. So as leaders in this room, we know that if we discovered a massive threat to our business, we would address it immediately. It would be part of every single OKR. We'd be talking about it. It would be integrated into our organization fully. It would be the top priority. And in some cases, it is that dire. They are assessing it and putting the resources towards it, but not enough, and definitely not all. So the truth does not change according to our ability to stomach it, and that's something that I deal with on a professional and personal level every day, but I think that this is very applicable to the state of the climate crisis. It's a tough and complicated situation that not one person or one organization can solve. It will actually take all of us, every species, every person, every organization, to prevent catastrophic climate change from happening. So we gotta kind of like let that sink in. This is the acceptance phase, acceptance slide. But now we're gonna go into kind of what we can do to assess this problem and then integrate it into business. So use those feelings as a map. We're in this acceptance phase of receiving this news. Some have known about it or cared about it or felt compelled to address it much longer, and some are kind of getting integrated into it now. But use it as a map to protect your business, industries, species, and the planet. And we're going to discuss how a business can do the right thing, do the smart thing, take action in a realistic way, and improve our communication strategies along the way. So, first step is admitting that climate risk is business risk. So if you're a chocolate company and there's a lot of hurricanes occurring in Central America, you are going to have challenges to get cacao, and that's going to disrupt your business. If you're a small bed and breakfast in Quebec, and it's summer of 2023, you're not only concerned about your structure, your building structure remaining intact, but you're also concerned about the loss of revenue that you're gonna receive because your clientele are not coming due to lack of safety or lack of air quality. Companies are concerned about climate change and its impact on industry, especially the ones that want to remain profitable and in business for a long time. So this is a real life example of a bankruptcy claim by PG&E. They actually filed under bankruptcy caused by climate change. And basically wildfires completely burned their service areas in California, and they owed over $30 billion in liabilities. So shareholders lost businesses, or billions in this, and then also the taxpayers that are local to that area will continue to pay on that just due to all of the cost for disaster relief costs. So risk mitigation requires action. Just like any opportunity or risk, it must be planned for, integrated, tracked, and then improved upon, and then rinse and repeat. Great ways to start is to identify where your stakeholder priorities are and then where they overlap with your climate priorities. So ask yourselves, what are my stakeholders communicating to me, and then what are my goals for climate action, and then see where they overlap. That's a great place to just get a win-win from that assessment. Where are stakeholders demanding action that's not on your priority list, and how can you either adjust your expectations and their expectations, or address their list in a more acceptable manner? And then ask yourself, what risks do these lists indicate for business and industry? And then how do all of the entities within one industry, how can they come together with a unified front to address them collectively? So organizations that are mitigating their risk are developing strategies to lower their environmental footprint, support company longevity, prepare for regulations, and then engaging existing and prospective stakeholders. So I'm gonna make a bold generalization about the people in this room. You like data. You enjoy it, you love it, you like looking at it and digging into it. It supports informed decision making, personalizes the user experience, and then it often takes something very complex and simplifies it and can articulate exactly what needs to be done by doing that type of data assessment. And risk mitigators are using data to measure and track their climate progress and how that's helping support their business longevity. By tracking and understanding your emissions, you can then identify inefficiencies, lower costs, and then increase your stakeholder loyalty. So here is how we can address climate holistically within your business. Climate action must be transparent. The successes, the mistakes, the learnings, all of that has to be exposed so that we can look within and externally and find successes. One example of this that I really liked is a shoe company talked about how they're going to have to delay their net zero targets by 10 years. Allbirds came out publicly and said, hey, you don't have to do this. We've already done some of the things that you've expressed as challenges. Here's everything that you need and everything that we've learned. Allbirds is establishing customer loyalty and brand loyalty by doing that, but they've also acknowledged that having the industry in itself address climate risk is both beneficial for the industry and then also for them. There isn't a competitive disadvantage for them to share how to address climate. And if we continue to measure and gain knowledge through data collection and collaboration, we can then set goals and track progress. We can avoid and reduce emissions within the organization and supply chain. We can then support external climate projects beyond the scope of your business, and then communicate our successes, our learnings, our mistakes, our successes, and then engage the stakeholders along the way. So all of these steps are very important, and they're cyclical, so they continue. But the one thing that I'm going to emphasize today is the impact of this one here in the teal of offsetting and funding. Companies that are doing well are the ones that are both decarbonizing their business and then funding external climate projects by purchasing credits. They're performing better and preparing themselves against business risk. So those that are doing both are just doing better. It's simple facts. And here's a study that shows just that. So if you are a bit familiar with the carbon market, there's a myth out there that's basically saying that companies that buy credits are using them to cover up their lack of action internally. So they're using them as a band-aid or a distraction. To combat that myth, Silvera took data from over 100 plus of the largest businesses across multiple industries over 8 years and split them in half. 50% of them did purchase credits, 50% of them did not purchase credits. And what they found is that the ones funding external climate projects were decarbonizing at 2 times the rate of those that were not. And this doesn't include the emissions deducted from supporting these climate projects. They're actually doing it better. And they're emitting less because they're addressing their climate risk holistically. They're looking at the entire picture. And so what we're learning is that carbon credits should be integrated into climate strategies to expedite impact beyond our own scope of work. And this is for every business. Oh yes, that's true. Clippy is right. We need to pause here. I've been referencing credits and I haven't even talked about what the carbon market is. So let's back up. We're gonna learn a little bit more about what credits are, the carbon market, where those credits are bought and sold, and just kind of dive in a bit deeper on how this is used. So, but first we're gonna play a little game. So just to kind of assess where everyone is or just get us moving, which of these is not a greenhouse gas? And again, intimate settings, you can shout out your answer. Safe place.
If at all.
Okay, C, that's a fancy way of saying water. So yes, that is correct. All right, next one. Which human activity emits the most CO2e? And when you see CO2e, it's a carbon dioxide equivalent. It's basically synonymous with a greenhouse gas. So just to clarify that, but which one of these emits the most?
B.
B.
B is a good answer. It would also really help me with this session too, because I'm talking about industry. Industry is actually 15%, and so there is one that's a bit higher, which is transportation. But industry still plays a significant role. You can pretend that's the answer just to kind of support the gusto of us. I'm gonna save the planet after this one. And then what level of understanding do you fall into about the carbon market and credit? So nothing at all, you just really want to know what this is, you didn't know what the title was. A little bit, you've heard about it, pretty well informed, maybe your company purchases credits or you read, you've got publications coming to your email inbox, or you're a subject matter expert, you're part of the sustainability org, you're a project developer, we could switch places right now.
B.
D, C, okay, cool. That's perfect. I love varied responses, so that makes it more fun in my opinion. All right, so let's define the carbon market. The carbon market is known as emissions trading. So it's basically a mechanism designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and combat climate change. It operates on the principle of putting a price on carbon emissions to create economic incentives for businesses and organizations to reduce their carbon footprint. So carbon markets play an important role for many companies that want or are required to compensate for their carbon footprint along with meeting their climate targets. So companies buy carbon credits, which fund a climate benefit. This allows the company to compensate for their own emissions or just further expedite climate impact. There's 2 main types of carbon markets, and it's based on whether your emissions reductions are mandatory or they're voluntary. So the mandatory version is the compliance carbon market. It's regulated by the government, where they're trying to cap emissions for specific industries. And then there's voluntary, there's actually a Washington compliance market now, which is really exciting. There's then the voluntary carbon market, and it's for entities to compensate for their emissions, to either compensate for them or to positively influence the fight against climate change. And this is how it works. The carbon market enables the trading of these carbon credits, also referred to as a carbon offset. I use them interchangeably. They basically mean the same thing, they're just they're used differently if they're applied for a specific reason. So the verbiage changes based on intent, not on based on what they are. 1 carbon credit is equivalent to 1 metric ton of a greenhouse gas. Carbon markets help companies compensate for their emissions and work towards their climate goals. So you can think of it as a token. This token represents a positive influence on the climate. That work is typically done by a project developer, but it's basically an entity that has integrated this type of benefit into their business. If you look on a carbon market, you can see project developers there, but you can also see businesses that are being rewarded by doing something, and then they can then sell that benefit on the market. And then it's then verified. So this is through a registry or some sort of certified regulator that can then apply rigorous standards to then say, yes, I agree, this is a climate benefit. And then there's the buyers, and they're looking to fund these climate projects for various reasons, again, to apply this token to their own business or simply support climate action.
So who are the certifiers? Because I've heard there's a lot of, at least internationally, there's a real question of who's actually certifying that they're doing the work and that the results are what they expected.
Yeah, so there's top registries. So my company, I work for a project developer, so we operate under the American Carbon Registry. You could also operate under Gold Standard, Climate Action Reserve, Verra. These are all of the top ones. And basically what they have is they'll have a methodology. So they have a science that states, you do this, you measure it by applying this method and this formula, and then it'll generate this much. So you do this action, and we've all deemed this correct, that it's right. And that goes under scientific review. There's time for public comment. And then once it's published, people can then apply that methodology to their work, and then it's deemed correct.
Is it global? Are they global?
Yes.
They are.
Yeah. You can have ones that are regional. You can have ones that are regionally preferred. So American Carbon Registry is international, but sometimes the word American kind of throws people off. Yeah. But all of these are global. There's also different ways that people are doing it. Blockchain registries are now becoming a bigger thing because it's basically just a way to enforce a methodology and a standard, but then also support transparency. So it's like, you can't just guesstimate, this isn't a back of the napkin kind of thing. You can't compost your lunch and be like, yes, you know, it has to be, I wish you should do that, but yeah, so that's kind of where it goes through, but those are the top ones at least.
Question.
Yeah.
Along the same line, this still sounds like, for example, the organic thing, right? If we buy something that's organic, this certified is a bit like that. You have all these methods, but exactly how they follow that, and is it some sort of accounting mechanism to actually look at that?
Yes.
Well, how does that work?
So there's a specific project type that can be performed. So I can use the work that I do, is we destroy refrigerants. So you measure the amount of refrigerant that's in a canister, then you weigh it, and then right before it's destroyed, you weigh it again, making sure that everything's correct. Then once it's destroyed in a rotary kiln that goes to a very high heat, it's then destroyed, then weighed, and then ultimately should be zero. Then we apply that so that we can say, this is the amount of work that we've done, and this is the standards we've upheld, and so we can then claim that as a carbon benefit. We then take that token, put it on the market, and then a Microsoft purchases it to either apply for their goal to their own climate goals, or they just simply know that refrigerants are really bad for the environment and they want to support our work.
Who are involved in this process? Only one person or two persons?
Oh, I wish it was. No, it's a project developer that does the work.
Okay.
Then you have a third party, typically a registry. So they come and verify your work.
Okay.
That could be
There we
multiple
go.
times.
Okay.
And then it's then put on the market. And
Got
so,
you.
you know, I mean, as any emerging market, red tape and rules are very good, but then they also limit. Being on the registries is very challenging for project developers. And I mean, if anyone wants to talk about Corsia, if you're one of those C and D arm raisers, I mean, the amount of loops and hoops that you have to jump through. It can be quite challenging, but it also upholds a standard that everyone has agreed upon. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. Yeah.
Hi, so what are some of the most popular projects or some of the emerging projects with high potential?
I mean, there's so many. I personally think that there's a bit of a Super Bowl, like football kind of mentality that goes into climate action. We all have like, we're a Patriots fan, and like, that's it. And it's the game itself is really important. You might gravitate towards certain things. Personally, I love immediate gratification. I come from hospitality originally. I like to drop a check, see a smile, and walk away. So I really like the projects that I'm affiliated with just because they're immediate, trackable, quantifiable, and it's done. I'm not planting a tree and like just hoping that it all works out. No offense to trees, I also love trees too. They just can't be the only thing, and it has to be a collection. So the companies that are supporting lots of different project types are the ones that are really seeing short-term, middle-term, long-term pursuit for climate positivity. And I'll go through some projects too. So again, I love metaphors. And so carbon market is kind of like the gift card market. So you have a restaurant that is attached a value to a card. And so we've all decided that that card means $20 US. So that might be $20 US that gets you 5 hamburgers, or it's $20 US that gets you half of a glass of wine, and you're still gonna have a bill at the end. And so whatever the different different varieties of what you're gonna get from that $20 US, it's still $20 US. And so that's kind of what the carbon market is. You can use that card to feed your family, so apply it towards your climate goals. Or kind of like what a lot of us did during COVID, you can use that card to simply just fund the restaurant so that you're putting money into something that you love and cherish and want to make sure it stays. And so both intents are great, but it's still adding dollars into the restaurant. And so that's kind of what I think about with the carbon market and the different simple reasons why businesses participate in it. All right, so here are some high quality credit indicators. This can kind of help you understand which ones are ones that are better than others. So there's 2 types. There's avoidance credits and then avoidance and reduction credits. And they're basically projects that prevent or reduce the release of carbon dioxide equivalents into the atmosphere. And that might include avoided deforestation, destroying refrigerants like what I do, and plugging oil and gas wells. So you're stopping emissions from actually happening. Then there's removal and sequestration projects. They're removing carbon or carbon equivalents, but typically carbon, from the atmosphere. And they're projects like reforestation, biochar production, and direct air capture. So those are some of the top project types that you'd see in those 2 categories. And no matter what type, they're still gonna fall into some of these indicators that can help you kind of determine where you want to put your investment. So additionality is where if this wasn't funded through the carbon market, it will not happen. So it's an additional climate benefit. If you have a tree in your yard, you can't just point at the tree and say, climate benefit. Now, if that tree was about to be cut down, then yes. If you've stopped it from being cut down, then yes, that is a benefit to the climate. Or if you plant a new tree, then yes, you're adding additionality. Permanence, is that work going to be a permanent climate solution? Really tough to prove with nature, just simply because of acts of God that can occur. But having more permanence, so let's say if it is a nature-based solution, that they've got a plan in place to protect that new forest, still there might be options where that could unfortunately go away, but they're putting things in place to make this a permanent solution. I get the check mark on that one easily because it's a gas that's been destroyed, so it's permanently destroyed. It can't come back, it no longer exists. But there's all different types that can fall under that. Accuracy and verifiable projects. Those are really important. They're transparent. They've been third-party verified. So it's, prove it, show your math, show me how this actually works. Responsible, so that means that they've calculated everything, they've measured it, they're transparent about it, and they also make sure that their climate benefit doesn't add new harm too. You wanna make sure that it's completed responsibly. And then there's other co-benefits like protecting wildlife, social impact, economic growth, educational awareness. Those are all things that could really help. So it also helps if the project developer is easy to work with and they're transparent. They want to really do this with you. That can be another benefit. So the carbon market fills the gap. The red line represents our current greenhouse gas emissions, and the green line represents carbon removal projects. So the carbon market can fund and incentivize closing this gap. The carbon market recognizes the need for holistic and realistic emission reduction strategies. And then the companies can choose how they want to reduce emissions, whether through technology upgrades, energy conservation, and then the purchase of carbon credits, like avoidance or removal credits. The carbon market is considered one of the key tools in fighting against climate change, as they help incentivize emission reductions while providing a mechanism for businesses to transition to a low carbon economy. So we need to cut emissions everywhere. And we need to act as quickly as possible, with the goal of slashing global emissions nearly in half by the early 2030s. So unfortunately in 2023, we are starting to miss this window of opportunity. So you have a party starting in an hour, your house is a mess, you still got time, but I would get to it. So that's kind of where we are, which is why I want to instill confidence and interest in funding and fueling this market. So I'm going to focus on some of the emergency brake measures, which reduce emissions quickly. They're ready to go now without delay. They don't have to wait for new infrastructure. They don't have to wait for new technology developed, and they can't wait for nature to accumulate carbon in trees and soils. So we need to identify the fastest, largest, and lowest cost climate solutions that we can deploy right now. And that includes internal decarbonization efforts and by funding climate projects that are reliant on the carbon market to financially support this work. So here are some emergency brake measures that are available today, and these are the ones that are identified by Project Drawdown. If you are in that A, B, C range of expertise, I'd highly recommend checking out their website or going old school and getting their book from the library. Really great tool to just really understand solutions, problems, and what we could do.
So what's that book again?
Project Drawdown. It's an organization, and then they have a book, and all their solutions are also on their website too. So these are deemed Project Drawdown's emergency brake measures. So I definitely encourage you to explore all project types, but again, I'm looking for those ones that are fast, quick, and will have that kind of pull of the brake type of impact, so that we can hopefully meet our goals by the early 2030s. So deforestation is very important. It's accounting for over 12% of the world's emissions and rising. Deforestation is highly concentrated in a few regions where forests are cleared to raise cattle, animal feed, and palm oil. Focused efforts of deforestation in Brazil and Indonesia would make a huge difference. We also need to focus on potent short-lived climate pollutants, so reducing methane and black carbon emissions in the short term, because these gases warm the planet faster than carbon. Cutting these emissions help us slow warming in the short term so that we can focus on more long-term solutions in the meantime. And then other emergency brake solutions focus on waste and efficiency. There are enormous opportunities to be more efficient in electricity, especially in business and industrial processes, industry through better management of materials, transportation through increased fuel efficiency and alternative transportation, and buildings with insulation, automation, and weatherization. And we should cut food waste by approximately 30 to 40%, because that is the amount of food that is never eaten. It could have a huge impact on how we lower emissions significantly. And there are a few other things that emissions could be cut quickly without harming any vulnerable people. Phasing out cryptocurrencies, private air travel, fast fashion, and simply just excessive and unnecessary consumption. There are obstacles to implementing these solutions, and so I'm definitely not stating that, but these solutions are available and they're happening now, and they're the lowest hanging fruits of what we need to actually address climate change. So this is where I work. I work at Tradewater. I'm going to use this not as a selling opportunity, even though I'm around after if you want to chat. But we're basically focusing on non-CO2 greenhouse gas emissions. And thus far, we've prevented over 6.7 million tons of non-CO2 gases from entering the atmosphere, which is equivalent to planting 100 million mature trees. The reason why we focus on non-CO2 gases is because they account for nearly half of all global warming from human activity since 1970. This pie chart is our greenhouse gas contributions to warming since 1750. And you can see on the right side, that's carbon, CH4, that's going to be methane, so huge area for improvement there. BC is right next to it, black carbon. We've got nitrous oxide, and then the two in the teal, and then the light blue up in the left upper hand corner that I'm pointing at. Those are refrigerants, CFCs and HFCs. A refrigerant is a coolant that goes in all types of appliances or anything that needs to be temperature managed. Oh, my little computer guy's on this side. Whoop. All right, there we go. And so one thing about non-CO2 gases is once they're leaked, they cannot be sequestered. So you basically just have to wait for them to leave the atmosphere. No nature or technology solutions can remove these gases once leaked. And so we're focused on these two categories, halocarbons and methane. Halocarbons include refrigerants, which are those CFCs and HFCs there. A coolant, they're over 10,000 times more potent than carbon, warm the planet quite quickly. And then we also focus on halons, which are a fire suppressant. They're over 6,000 times more potent than carbon. And then we also focus on methane, which is 84 times more potent than carbon and is responsible for at least 25% of the global warming that we're experiencing today. So here are some halocarbon examples that we've done. In 2017, Tradewater developed the first refrigeration collection and destruction project in Africa. And Tradewater worked with a local recycling center to consolidate the refrigerants from the collected old refrigerators and then also a stockpile of CFCs that they had. We then shipped it to the United States, and more than 33,000 pounds were destroyed, resulting in the issuance of over 150,000 offsets. This then helped fund even more projects, like our current project that's going on in Thailand right now. Over 120,000 kilograms of old refrigerants were brought into the country illegally. So the Thai Customs Department seized these gases, and then we are working with them currently to collect, control, and then ultimately destroy them before they leak into the atmosphere. The total impact of this project exceeds 1.1 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So 2016, we just started in the United States. Now we have projects going on all around the world, including the destruction of halons and refrigerants, and then also methane. So we address methane, which is leaking from orphaned and abandoned oil and gas wells. So we plug these wells. Methane has a global warming potential of 84 times than carbon, and again is responsible for at least 25% of global warming. The IPCC, which is what we referenced early in 1990, recognizes the reduction of methane as the top and most effective strategy for slowing down warming. In the United States alone, there's over 3 million abandoned and orphaned oil and gas wells that are leaking methane. These risks pose significant problems for the environment, but also for our health and well-being. Leaking these toxic chemicals into the air, contaminating groundwater, and it's emitting this gas that's then going into our water systems as well. A significant portion of these wells are located on private land, so it's prohibiting the farmer or landowner from doing their work, and it also lowers the property value and land productivity of their property too. So not only does it harm the planet, harms us as a society, as a species, and then also harms our economy. So there's lots of reasons to plug these wells as soon as possible. We're finding these wells, measuring the methane that they leak, and then ultimately plugging them. And all of this work is only possible through the carbon market.
Are you circling back with the original developers of those wells, or is that just ancient history at this point?
So, wells can either be abandoned or orphaned. So an oil and gas company comes, the landowner seems to think it's a great revenue opportunity for them to lease their land for this drilling. The drilling occurs, and then typically what's found is that the oil and gas company spent a lot of money to drill it, and then they've identified hydrogen sulfide in the well, which is very expensive to remove and it can't be used. And now they've just deemed it as like a money suck. So they then sold it off, and then sold off that mom and pop oil and gas company, then went out of business. Like the paper trail just kind of disappears. Oil and gas companies are required to plug abandoned oil and gas wells. I'm not too familiar on how they delay that plugging. It's significant though. I've had some state that they've got hundreds of thousands of them that are abandoned, and one state that they know about that they're working towards plugging. We're specifically focusing on the orphaned ones. They have no owner, no solvent business to accuse, so no one's gonna fix it. There is a small amount, I say it sounds big, but it's small based on the amount that's required. There is federal funding in the United States to plug some of these wells, but it's nowhere near the amount that's required to do it. So we're doing the ones that the state has identified that they're not gonna plug. And the ones we're choosing are really nasty, like they're in really bad shape.
So who's funding that?
The carbon market,
Oh,
yeah.
Why are they orphaned?
So they've been sold off and sold off. So they're really expensive to take the oil and gas out of it because they have hydrogen sulfide. I'm gonna have to go back to school to find out why that isn't available, like why that isn't good from a fuel standpoint. It's nasty. It's not clean enough for them to use. And for them to separate it, it would be even more money. And they've just been like, this is a money pit. And this is a
Yeah, but
limit.
that's the abandoned one, what's this orphan version?
So they've sold it off to a company that then is no longer
So it's
exists.
like sold off.
Yeah.
But they still did it.
Correct. But they've sold it off, so it's
And the
not theirs.
government's not holding them
It'd
liable.
be like if you sold your home and it's got mold, black mold. You sold it off, whatever, then they sold it because they found it, they didn't want to pay for all that to be done. They're not gonna call you back and say, hey, so, yeah,
What a joke.
it's pretty wild, yeah, yes.
So you mentioned roughly 3 million in the US alone.
Abandoned and orphaned.
Yeah. Do we know how many in the world? Like what's the estimate worldwide?
How many of them are what?
Are abandoned around the world?
I'm not sure. I only know the US, and I know there's about 1 million orphaned ones, so. And we're currently just working in the Midwest, going down a basin, just one by one. A lot of people ask me like, why aren't you in Texas and Oklahoma yet? But a well's a well's a well. So, we're just plugging them as we go down this basin and then hopefully continuing to expand. But if there's so much scrutiny about the carbon market, which is how this work is funded, we're constantly just kind of combating that myth that I referred to about how it's a Band-Aid for companies to abuse. And that simply just isn't the case, and it's also hard for us to hear that because that's kind of where that's our source of funding for us to do the work. So we have to combat both sides. We actually have to do the work successfully, and then also, shout from the rooftops like, please help us. It's interesting. Yeah.
Are you finding a lot of state legislation that's helping or hindering you in your work to try to flood these wells?
I mean, for me personally, it'd be nice that it was just covered by the oil and gas companies specifically, like they had to pay for it. We've had great relationships with the states. They've been working quite closely with us because they see us as an opportunity, as a partner. They can't do it. I think to plug all of these wells, it would be like over $400 billion just allocated to wells. So they're excited to work with us because they've basically checked off the ones they can cover, and in that long list, we're going through them and just doing the work. So I've seen it, as a positive, but in an ideal world, yeah, I'd love for this not to be a project type we were doing because it wasn't a problem in the first place. Like,
Are you seeing any opportunity for extended producer responsibility or PROs to get involved?
I have no idea, like how how that would work. It would be nice, yeah. I mean, like I mentioned, high quality indicators, additionality, that would remove us from being able to be on the carbon market because it's not an additional climate benefit if somebody else is figuring out. Me personally, I'd be more than happy to have that, and then we'd partner on food waste or something, you know, but it's a problem that's not going to be addressed through the government, through philanthropic initiatives, or from oil and gas to simply say like, hey, I need to go back out there.
Plug those wells like
yeah,
you did in the
yeah.
rivers.
You know, I put a lot of money into making sure no one thought this was an issue, and now everyone's mad at me, so I'm gonna go fix it up and change my entire business model. They've got a lot of things they need to do. But I do feel optimistic by this graph. The voluntary carbon market is gaining momentum and it plays an important role. We're seeing it to continue to build as a very large market, and you can see that now. And I just want to continue to see that growth so that more climate benefits can be achieved through this type of funding. But let's see who's kind of showing how good they are at what they do. Patagonia. It's an outdoor apparel company that's big on the environment. The company made headlines with its Don't Buy This Jacket campaign, which was meant to discourage customers from purchasing too many Patagonia products. In 2025, they will eliminate virgin petroleum fiber in their products and only use preferred materials, eliminating their reliance on fossil fuels. In 2025, their packaging and tags will be 100% reusable, home compostable, which is really cool, renewable and easily recyclable. And by 2040, they will be net zero across their entire business through decarbonization strategies and through their work in the carbon market. Next one is Tesla. Some of you may have driven one today. They say that their mission is to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. The electric car manufacturer has a code of conduct that has all of their suppliers have a pledge to avoid harm to the environment, responsible management of all waste, and efficient use of water and energy. They build their factories to limit waste, water usage, and energy consumption. With each gigafactory, they are able to manufacture products more sustainably. And this includes that their roofs are covered with solar panels. They're leveraging AI to see how they can be more efficient with their energy usage. And then one of the things I really like is that they have direct sourcing and mining and refining companies. So they work directly with the location, which should eliminate vulnerable markets and vulnerable communities from mining, which is an often criticism of electric vehicles. And then can't forget about Microsoft. They're pretty cool. They funded over 1.4 million metric tons of carbon removal in fiscal year 2022. And they're actually one of the first to issue a multi-year forward offtake commitment for carbon removal and hopes to further scale the carbon market. So not only are they funding this work, but they're also acknowledging that when they do fund this work, they're instilling that confidence that we need in the carbon market. Because as we all know, Microsoft's doing it, you know, so they're a very trustworthy brand to follow. They funded the replenishment projects that are estimated to provide more than 15.6 million cubic meters in water benefit over the lifetime of the projects, allowing for Microsoft to become water positive. And in fiscal year 2022, they diverted 12,000 metric tons of solid waste from landfills and incinerators across their entire supply chain. Other shout outs about Microsoft is that they have a cool land protection program. It's a big game migration program. They have environmental justice investments, biodiversity projects, energy efficiency and thermal energy on campus, decarbonizing their supply chain, and many more. So again, interactive and 1990, the good old billboard, best way to advertise yourself. I almost brought out Beanie Babies and then I was like, we've gone too far. But what are some shout out, if there's any companies that come to mind that you've seen both do something really well for their own market, but then also you've seen them funding climate projects, or just businesses you love because they kind of do the right thing?
Shopify, Stripe.
Cool. Yeah, anything specific?
Well, I think Microsoft's led a lot of this, but there was a white paper Microsoft did a couple of years ago. Like, if you were new to this, to me, it was the most fascinating way to look at how to think about this, and it's a shared knowledge base. Another company that I've worked with is Anheuser-Busch, where they, Coca-Cola, Unilever, and Colgate-Palmolive have come together with probably the world's best accelerator for sustainability, and they said, we're not going to compete, we're just going to share. So you go to New York, you present your ideas, and then each of the 4 companies sees that, and if they like it, they can take those companies up. So it's mostly startup based, some are bigger, but there's a lot of interesting work going on.
I love that. Anyone else?
Ecolab is another one, and I'm struggling to think of the specifics, and I know they're a big Microsoft client that I used to work with. And they do a lot in the industrial cleaning area. You'll see the Ecolab soaps on the walls for hand soap, and they also do industrial dishwashing kind of thing. And they're really working on, like, Microsoft being water positive.
Yeah.
And putting more clean water back than they're taking out.
Yeah.
Water.
Water.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say water and recycling are 2 things that I would just like love. I might use my son like to do that exploration, like let's go see a treatment plant. But I'd really love to know more about ways to improve upon that.
So I'm working with a company called GEVO that's doing sustainable aviation fuel and also
cool.
ethanol based stuff. So renewable biomass into fuels. And so a gallon of aviation fuel can be 50% biomass based or organic versus your car is typically more like 10. So there's a lot of benefit that can be gained from taking corn and other things, converting it.
But that's a good example of where, but that's also much more expensive than traditional fuel. So how do we sort of balance the cost element?
Yeah.
Because that's gonna be a big driver of how aggressive this move is.
No, that's exactly right. And so GEVO this is all public, but they have plans for a $950 million plant in South Dakota with offtake agreements with people like Delta and United, but the price of that is higher. And so the issue that company has is if you say we'll pay $1.50 more per gallon than the current price, you don't know what the current price is going to be today, tomorrow, or 3 or 5 years. So how do you fund that with a IRR that the private equity wants at 15+%? Because it's unclear. Right? If fossil fuels go up, it works wonderfully. But if they don't, and so what is the economic benefit of the carbon offset there? And you could start model that out $20-$30. But anyway, it gets complicated quickly. Yeah.
There's a bigger impact of that one as well, because to grow more corn to feed that system, you need more fertilizer. And fertilizer comes from fossil fuels, is big on emissions, and then it's nitrous oxide into the atmosphere. So the whole supply chain impact of some of those projects is going to be interesting to map out, because definitely biofuel and ethanol, don't know, nobody tracks the supply chain. So even though you're reducing petroleum use at the car level, you're not necessarily reducing emissions across the entire supply chain. So it's going to be interesting to see how some of that stuff plays out in the balance.
There's lots of examples of like the positive and potentially negative impacts of some of these solutions, like EVs with mining, which is why I mentioned that specifically with Tesla, but the Congo and areas where a lot of the lithium and things are being mined, it does have community impact as well as environmental impact, but then it's lowering our reliance on fossil fuels. Same with solar panels. There's not really like the best way to recycle those, and so integrating these solutions with end-of-life solutions as well, the circular economy piece of solution is really important. And I think a lot of us are working really hard to try to do all of that all at the same time. I do think that when things are more expensive and there's businesses, I mean, reality is one thing, but let's just ignore it. But when it is more expensive, they might be acknowledging that this cost increase will protect my overall ability to remain in business. So it's like it's a required investment, I think that the organizations that are kind of trying to figure out their P&L and how they can make these modifications are acknowledging that it's something that they must do. And you know, what will that do to small and medium-sized businesses and things? You know, there's definitely repercussions, but I do think the ones that are investing into more expensive pieces of their supply chain are acknowledging that they have to. I sometimes correlate this with diversity and inclusion. You have to make an investment into that with the acknowledgement that you will be creating a more innovative and collaborative community that will then benefit your business. But there has to be intent and resources allocated to then support that change in your business. So I kind of see it somewhat similarly. Environmental injustice is very much so an important topic.
That goes a bit to me back to your Allbirds example, where if the entire industry is raising their level, then that's just a cost of doing business in that industry. But if people don't have to, then it's disproportionately applied to the companies trying to do the right thing. So there is a little bit, how do you just raise the bar for everybody?
Yeah.
And it makes it easier to do business, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think we should be celebrating progress, even if it isn't meeting the expectations that we are hoping to achieve. If someone says, we had 2% female representation in leadership and now we have 6. It doesn't sound that great, so that should be addressed, but we should also be great work now, get back in there and keep doing it and do it, let's see where some scalability gaps are. But I have a session that I do about cancel culture and climate, and I know it's really hard to resist because it's scary. And so if we operate under a fear-based type of mentality, it's just never going to be good enough because we need things to be resolved much faster. And I have to personally resist, and I do not have the experiences of all people, but I do have to resist that finger pointing at times, because we all, going back to the environment, we've all contributed to pollution in some way. I mean, we're all part of this problem, some more than others, of course, but pointing the finger, that's not going to help. Just so many companies now you see hiding greenwashing or green hushing. They're no longer going to purchase offsets anymore because of their scrutiny. Look at Delta, aerospace and everything. Delta has now publicly said we're not going to fund offsets. That's a problem for people doing this work. It also makes everyone say, I wonder what's wrong with that market. I shouldn't do that. People follow suit. And that type of headline is really disruptive to us being successful. And green hushing is a thing too. I have a lot of clients that have funded a significant amount of climate benefit and they aren't saying a word about it. And they don't want to, because they just kind of want to go under the radar. They want to do the right thing. They want to do the smart thing, but they don't really want to be part of the conversation. It's too risky, which is tough because it'd be great to name drop, so that others in the industry help support, but it's really tough. Should I name drop it now? Create some disruption.
Before you go on, what's your take on Vera? So the reporting in the Guardian came out, and 94% of what Vera had as credits was basically garbage.
Yeah.
They're not verified properly, or not scientifically based. That right there says, there's a lot of work to be done on the verifier side to make sure this is accurate and traceable.
Yeah.
Do you see that changing? I'm looking into Vera's V2 stuff, and it's still very much similar in terms of structure. There's still no real science basis for how they're doing their assessment. They just kind of get people out and go with the projects.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see that there's going to be some sort of shift towards more science-based targets and measurement there, or are other verifiers taking it differently?
So I'll say my politically correct response to that being that I think quantifying benefit can be hard, especially with nature-based. So I'm not in nature, and so ours is really easy. You measure the amount of methane coming out of the well, you plug it, you make sure none of it's leaking anymore. It's now gone from this to 0, and then you make sure that's done properly, and then now the land is back to its rightful state. A forest, you have a specific forest, and then maybe only 15% of it was going to be logged. And there's been accusations that they were claiming the entire forest as the benefit itself, so it's not achieving additionality. They're just only 5 of these 10 trees were actually going to be cut down, but they're saying that 10 of them provide that benefit. So politically correct response is that quantifying benefit is hard, and to get like just the final number of something that has so many different aspects to it is challenging, and we're trying to just get a number at the end of the formula.
But there's even for the forest example, there's another level of that. So if I take those trees and make deaths where the carbon doesn't get released and then plant new trees,
Yeah.
I could argue that's a net benefit to the environment, right? But if I take those trees and burn them,
Right.
clearly it's not. I mean, so
Yeah.
it depends what you do, with the product. Am I right or am I wrong in that?
I mean, I think storage is storage. I mean, if you're like biochar, for instance, and there's a lot of scrutiny with biochar being a solution, but you're basically making sure that when carbon's not released, because it can cut down a tree and it's burned or something, that carbon, these are just boxes of carbon that we're trying to maintain, which is why deforestation is so important. But yeah, it's really tough to quantify some of these projects. Going on the non-politically correct side, I mean, there's definitely been internal accusations of profit, trying to focus on the profitability of projects versus the actual impact. Also, just like contracts with countries have not been very equitable. That's why the Delta example is relevant, because a lot of the credits were through Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe wasn't getting a very good deal in it, and so they then took the credits back, and so then that removed credits from businesses that had, so that was like more of an international contract issue. But then all we're hearing is like, credits aren't real, and so no one's really like diving into it. We can't, there's too much out there. So I think that, to answer your question somewhat, I've been like dodging it. I think that there will be, as long as we continue to support the carbon market and not let it collapse in itself, which again, that graph that I will like sleep with, if we can continue to do that, then we can continue to put pressure on doing better. And I think that that's really the outcome, is that we push to do better. And so, yeah.
It seems like the space that you're in, like, it's measurable and it's like you can actually like define it well. I get nervous around like any of the soil carbon metrics, forests, like any of that stuff is just, all it takes is 1 year where you till and all that carbon's gone.
Yeah.
Or some portion of it, but like it's really, it's gonna be interesting to see how that evolves over the next couple of years.
Yeah. And the American Carbon Registry is a nonprofit that's, but there's a lot of very well-intentioned registries emerging too. I think compliance markets coming up more and more, where you're mandated to fund projects and do better, decarbonize at a specific rate. That will show a lot of growth. So, I mean, there's a lot of things happening. Just again, to cut emissions by early 2030s, we can talk about these issues and they're very important, but then stay the course.
So we talked about staying the course. So now what? You know the problem, the essential balance of both internal and external climate action projects, and how industry can change how we experience the next 100 years. Now what? Start with encouraging a sense of urgency for action within your organization. Share more about why specific decisions are being made with your stakeholders, and get more specific about your actions and impact claims. Make sure they're not misleading, or are they generating the necessary amount of impact? Provide documentation, imagery, and assets to showcase more about your work and its impact. Be transparent in your risks, shortcomings, or requirements for progress. Engage with a third party to vouch for the legitimacy of your claims, as well as provide expertise on continued improvements. and address climate change holistically. We need all solutions deployed right now. And that's why I really focused on those emergency brake solutions. They cover all different types of climate action. But what they do is that they can do something today in this urgent time that it's necessary. We need to address climate change in this holistic way to ensure that we're prioritizing the current catastrophic threat as well as the future. And then share your plans for next year and how your actions will continue to improve, have permanent impact, and who will be responsible for their implementation. And help generate increased demand within the carbon market. By supporting these emergency brake solutions, we not only can help heal the planet and protect civilization as we know it, but then also we can increase that demand for others to join us on this collective fight. Continued and increased demand in the carbon market will allow for us to solve our way out of this. And I hope throughout this presentation, I was able to provide clarity on one of the most necessary markets and climate mechanisms available today. We've literally created a financial mechanism to support climate action, and that is incredibly empowering. We still need to fuel that fire. You can visit tradewater.us to learn more about non-CO2 climate work or access additional resources about just climate solutions and impact in general. And I'll leave you with this quote: by questioning all the aspects of our business, we continuously inject improvement and innovation into our culture. So I ask you, what are you waiting for? I really appreciate everyone's conversations today and the questions. Please reach out to anyone at Tradewater or anyone in the trusted climate action community that you want to lean on educating yourself about the carbon market or ways that you can contribute. Definitely want to make sure that everyone is open to feedback and that we can continue to address challenges and increase optimism. So I thank you all for your interest in climate action and supporting the carbon market, and I hope to see more of you soon. Thank you.